Hey everyone, I'm here with Devin, the CEO and founder of Dosu. Devin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Amit. Happy to
So
be
tell me a
here.
little bit about Dosu and what you all do.
Yeah, at Dosu, we are helping automate kind of all the work that what we call automate engineering knowledge work. So basically, all the work that engineers do that require an understanding of code and code changes that aren't necessarily coding. What this boils down to is helping automate developer support and documentation. So, kind of working towards a vision where you build and Dosu documents.
That's really cool. Tell me a little bit about how you guys were founded, what the founding story was.
I started the company about a year and a half ago, and the context was that I had been an early engineer at a few different startups before. And as an early engineer, I always had a lot of context about not just how the code base operated, but how that related to product decisions we've made, to customers and sales decisions. And I always felt like I became kind of a bottleneck or the go-to person for this information, whether a customer issue came up and they want to know, who should we talk to about this? Did we ship anything into production recently? Or, a PM's trying to understand, like, how does this product feature actually work? And when I was looking at LLMs, I had been working with them prior to starting Dosu. I felt like there's a lot of focus on LLM's ability to write code, but not necessarily this other piece of what you do with an understanding of code. And so I started Dosu to focus on that problem.
What's the vision of the company 5 years from now? You guys are wildly successful. What does the company look like? What are you guys trying to kind of move towards?
Yeah, I think the kind of 5 year or long-term vision is what I alluded to before around, um, you know, we want to build a world where developers build and Dosu documents. So you kind of are making PRs, discussing things in Slack, and as you're working, all this activity, whether it's in tickets and PR reviews, in commits, is producing knowledge. And our job is to help organize that knowledge and keep it up to date as you are moving. And so that enables a lot of really interesting things about not just documentation, but really about how developers collaborate.
Talk to me a little bit about kind of the milestones along the way. Like, what do you guys have to prove kind of consistently over the next few years to like prove that you're kind of moving towards this ultimate goal?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we started off, and Dosu today is extremely popular with an open source. So I didn't mention that, but in my background, I'm also an active open source maintainer in a few popular projects. And we started off in open source, focusing on the support angle. So how do you use code and code changes, like that raw source of truth information, to help with developer support? And as we've done that, we've realized that a lot of the value that we were creating in the support side is actually helping generate something that looks like documentation. And so now we're repositioning and focusing on documentation as a first class product rather than just as like an internal tool for Dosu. And so that was milestone one, was like, are we able to help save developers time in this support use case, take some of this like knowledge work off people's plates? Um, you know, Step two for us, and so we've got great traction in open source. We have enterprise customers. We've kind of checked the box on like, can we build something useful? Is this possible with this technology? And then next for us is really scaling our kind of open source to enterprise conversion, or flywheel, whatever you want to call it, where we can tell a really compelling story where someone ends up on GitHub issues because they're running into a problem. And they see Dosu, it's able to help solve their issue. And then they can go to our website, sign up, and bring it in internally to help them with similar types of problems internally.
That's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of the traction you mentioned? It's popular with open source. Tell me about kind of the user base, how you guys have been funded, and then kind of where you guys are at right now.
Yeah, so we have, I think something that's unique about Dosu is we've pretty much I launched the initial product in 3 weeks. So we have had a product almost since the beginning, and it's also been active in open source. So you can see a history of Dosu within open source, all of our kind of early wins, and also, shortcomings and how the product's matured over time. Like I was saying before, our traction within open source is fantastic. Our installed on over 32,000 repositories, both public and private. we really target right now open source maintainers. So if you are a small team of engineers supporting hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of other engineers, which is common within open source, or internal developer tools teams at larger companies, Dosu is a great product for you. And in terms of funding and team size, we've raised a total of $9.5 million over the past year and a half. We're fairly small and lean right now. We're only a team of 6 full-time, but looking to grow. And in terms of where we're going is, expanding who can use Dosu from just these maintainer kind of persona or expert personas to just individual developers as well.
How do you think about Dosu in terms of the bull case here? How are you guys going to win? It's getting more and more competitive in terms of building LM tools for developers. What sets you guys apart?
Really good question. I would say the bull case for us is that what we have found building Dosu on the support side is, and this is true, it's like relearning the principles of machine learning, is garbage in, garbage out. And so high quality knowledge is super critical for LLMs. And so we started building this kind of documentation pipeline for Dosu for our agent. And the bull case is that if Dosu can become essentially a data source or an LLM first data source for any other AI agent that is building on top of a code base, then Dosu becomes extremely complementary to any existing AI tool you have, whether it's GitHub Copilot, Cursor, or some other internal AI tool. You need high quality knowledge. And if Dosu can help curate and maintain that, then it becomes, I think, a pretty essential piece of the developer stack.
That makes sense. So what's your pitch to candidates? Why is Dosu a great place to work?
Well, I think, first, it's a really fun problem. It has all the qualities that I think are appealing to engineers. I mean, I'm an engineer. Right now, we're a team of all engineers, but we are looking to hire non-engineers as well. And so with that, we have a problem that you have the opportunity to build a product that you want, right? Where you are a developer, and we're building for developers. And so we find people that want to work at Dosu have experienced this problem, and they're like, I would love to solve this. And I see the vision where this is how the future could look, and I can work with Dosu to do that. And then also, as an engineering first team, we all, everyone on the team really loves coding. We have a team of engineering excellence. And so it's a really good place to learn if you're interested in growing technically. And related to that is we work on very hard problems. Everything I've described is doable. It's never been done. And so we even collaborate with research labs on these types of problems around knowledge synchronization and other related things. So it's a place technically very interesting, a product that I think is fun and resonates. And, you can also have impact, right? Tens of thousands of people see Dosu every month, and hopefully, that'll keep growing and growing and growing.
That's awesome. I'd love to dive into that, some of those technical challenges. Off the top of your head, what are some of the key ones that you're most excited to tackle over the next few months?
Yeah, the one that I'm really excited to tackle over, let's say, the next year, 2 years even, is what in kind of the research literature is called just-in-time inconsistency detection. So the idea is, given new knowledge, so that could be a merged PR or a resolved ticket, what knowledge in your set of documents is now inconsistent or stale? And so this is kind of the holy grail of up-to-date documentation in a general purpose way, which has never been possible before without LLMs, where they can somewhat reason or pattern match really well around hey, are these facts in this one document consistent with another one? And so trying to crack that problem and build the system that can do that, the engineering system, it's both a research level problem, but also on an engineering system level is quite complex, building the relationships between all these different entities.
Yeah, and for that particular question, how do you think about the type of uncertainty or the types of risks you guys are trying to tackle? Is it system design risk? Is it research risk, meaning this thing has just never been done before? Or is it even product risk in terms of how do you construct something where it gives a user a good feedback loop and stuff? Where would I'm sure there's a lot of everything, but which is kind of the biggest one in your mind?
Really good question. I think in the AI space generally, it's an interesting time where there's a lot of product demand. So there isn't as much product risk. I can describe self-generating, self-maintaining documentation, and everyone is yes, please give me that today.
Okay.
And so the risks comes more on the technical side, where there's research level questions hey, is this actually possible with current technology today?
Right.
Or is it just out of reach, and are we going to be able to close that chasm? And the other side is also product risk around, LLMs today hallucinate, or like they're not factually always correct. And so how do you build a compelling product experience that is keeps the humans in the loop and kind of in control to a certain extent without overwhelming them with information, actually creating more work? So like nailing that balance between generating information for users but not overwhelming them is actually like a key product challenge for all AI companies.
And when you guys think about the work that you do day to day, like, are you spending time doing research, or is it working with stuff that the labs are like, just staying up to date and at the cutting edge of what the labs are producing?
We definitely spend a lot of time like kind of staying up to date about what's going on and how they might apply to Dosu. And we have like lunch and learns as a team, whether it's people internally presenting or us inviting other startups related to come present their product or talk about, the problems they're solving. So we have a culture around that, but generally we're a very applied company. So, we're
Makes
really
sense.
trying to deliver value to our users.
Yeah.
And we're fortunate that we have a fairly large user base to experiment with. So we're tracking product metrics and trying to, ship features that, move the needle.
I'd love to talk to a little bit about your culture, especially at the size that you guys are at, 6 people. I think a lot of that comes down to the founder and like your personality, how you like to build, how you like to work. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Like, what is the company culture like? What are the things that, set you guys apart in terms of the way you work?
Yeah, I would say the company culture, like you're saying, it's very reflective of me. And so it's been kind of fun, like kind of looking at myself in the mirror in some ways. But what that ends up looking like is, like I was saying before, I love coding, and just engineering generally, and I think that is felt throughout the team. Like we love building products, but we also like interesting technical problems. And everyone on the team is very kind. Maybe to a fault. We have a very kind, kind of hardworking team, and self-motivated. So people on the team have either started companies themselves before or have already been an early engineer in another startup. They know what they're getting themselves into, and they kind of love the intensity of this environment. So I would say everyone works quite hard, but also just like we're here to also have fun, And so it's like kind of collaborative, and I would say like light in terms of like, we're not taking anything overly seriously, but we do care a lot.
And then can you talk me through a little bit give me a picture of how things work at Dosu? Like specifically, give me an overview of the team, where you guys are located, but also beyond that, like I'd love to understand how something goes from like idea to shipped code.
Great question. So in terms of where we're at, we have an office in San Francisco, kind of close to Hayes Valley. It's right in between Hayes, Dubose, the Mission, Castro, Market Street, and then we have a kind of in-person but flexible policy. So most people come to the office most days, but we allow like working remotely whenever you want. Everyone, I think there's a lot of trust in terms of people are just getting their things done. For how a product or a feature idea goes from idea into actually getting implemented, it starts off, typically we describe it as like negative splits is what we use. It's like we have some runners on the team, but the idea is like, we do a lot of upfront work to make sure we're aligned and then execute. So the tail end of the process is typically really fast. And the upfront work looks like discussing engineering and product ideas, making sure we're all aligned on like what the product should look like, user requirements. We have a designer, a part-time designer we work with to then kind of put those ideas into a form that we can then have a further discussion. And also often we find that design is a good forcing function to really think through the user experience in edge cases. And then once we have that, then it's just execution. Right now, we're small, so usually one person will own a feature end to end, everything from infrastructure, database, backend, and sometimes front-end changes. And then, we do code reviews along the way, but our code review policy is like, you'll know if you need review. So you can ship fast if that is what is like, if you're confident. But if you want review, if you have questions, then like we'll do code reviews.
Do you have to be, given that you're kind of deployed in so many different open source repositories and stuff, do you guys have to take kind of QAing or anything else or code review more seriously than you would say if it was a pure kind of, I don't know, like consumer facing app or something?
Yes. So I would say, yeah, we do. Testing is hard. We've come actually a really long way over the past year and a half in terms of our integration tests, unit test coverage, and being able to ship more confidently. And so we've gotten to a good place. I think we can be in an even better place. So we have decent QA controls in place, but we're far from perfect. Another kind of interesting thing about building the space is we do a lot of integrations, right? GitHub, Slack, Jira, as well as heavily rely on model APIs. And so we have a lot of outages that are dependent on our third-party providers. So thinking about how to build a resilient system when GitHub goes down a surprising amount.
Yeah, I've been there.
And so thinking about how to scale integrations is also top of mind.
How do you also think about kind of the hallucination approach? Is there things like, as models change, as things change on that side, also you can't necessarily assume that everything you're going to get is going to be perfect from that side. Do you guys do stuff at the test time or QA time to kind of ensure that you're getting useful results?
Yes. We have two approaches to this. So one is on just generally evals. We are in a really fortunate position in that the way that Dosu operates today, it's typically in public domains. So what I mean by that is it's a internal Slack channel that everyone is usually chatting about engineering things, or it's a public open source project where Dosu will jump in and try provide useful information. But even when it's incorrect, there's usually a resolution to the thread that Dosu's on. So we get really strong signal about was Dosu correct? And if it wasn't, what was the delta and what might have gone wrong? So we're able to collect a really good evaluation data that we then can use for rolling out additional models. So that's one piece. And evals are really hard. We've come a long way as well, but there's still plenty of room to grow. And then the other side is what I was mentioning before is on more on the product side of how to incorporate what we call experts or subject matter experts that are maintainers or service owners internally, have them review Dosu's work at some cadence to provide more explicit feedback and make sure things look correct.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit about the team. Who works at the company? Where have they worked before? Who would people kind of be working with?
Yeah, we are a team of either previous founders or previous early engineers or open source maintainers right now. I think that covers everyone. So the general theme there is people really like to build, and then everyone has actually very different backgrounds technically. There's one person on the team who has a PhD in mass communication psychology and then became an engineer. And he actually brings a really interesting perspective to the team because he did a lot of NLP work during his PhD and has thought a lot about communication, which it turns out a lot of LLM work is communication. It's actually way more important today than it has been ever in engineering. And so I think, they bring a lot of interesting insights about how to present information back to users. Another person on the team is from Sweden. He actually got an O1 to come work here at Dosu, and he started a YC company during college. And so also, just loves to build products that people use. And so we actually have a fairly diverse in terms of background. I think we have more immigrants than non-immigrants on the team right now, which is fun.
It seems like the thing that kind of unites everybody is this desire to build or this love to build, essentially.
Yes.
So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit. So when you think about selecting talent, is that kind of the biggest predictor of success for you guys, a love to build?
A love to build, and I guess everyone's very passionate. Maybe I also didn't touch on about not just their work. They care, like I was saying, we really care about our work, whether it's engineering excellence or just doing the right thing, making being very responsible. People really are intrinsically motivated, I think is the word I'm searching for.
Yeah.
And really care about the work they do. And that's true both in work and then outside of it. So everyone on the team has a lot of hobbies. We have a lot of very good chefs on the team. We have amazing photographers or extreme, very accomplished athletes. So everyone has a lot of things that they are pretty passionate about, both at work, but then also outside of it. And so I think someone who is successful here has that same level of intensity and care in the things they do, whether it's work or outside of it.
So how do you guys test for that? Walk me through the interview process. What does it look like?
Yeah, so the interview process is fairly standard. We have a first initial intro call probing, it's very casual, but meant to probe for some of these qualities that are maybe just higher level and also get a sense of where they would fit in the team. Then from there, we have a coding challenge that's take home. I personally really don't like LeetCode and HackerRank. And so we try make the interview process as similar to day-to-day work as possible. So we give you access to a GitHub repo, and there's a feature, and your job is to make a PR to implement that feature. It's not very onerous, but feels a bit like working. And then along those lines, the next step in the process is a code review call. So actually going through the PR you generated and talking about design decisions, trade-offs you made, other things you might consider if this was a production setting, as you would for a regular pull request. And then we have an on-site. So that is coming into the office, meeting the team, having lunch, and then higher level conversations. So one, thinking about how do you build something like Dosu from an engineering systems perspective, and then two, what we call our product thinking interview, which is what I said before. We want every engineer to build a product that they would want. What are some ideas that you have of like cool things that we might be able to build with the data we have access to? And then how would we scope those out and maybe actually execute on them?
Given that you've hired a bunch of people and you've been doing this for a little while, is there any part of the process that is like really high signal that you didn't expect to be, or just in general high signal?
I would say, I think, and this is always true, the on-site interviews around kind of thinking about the product, or like kind of those settings where you're actually collaborating with someone on a problem, like trying, I think we always try to do that throughout the process as much as possible. It's much easier in person, but really any interview which you really feel like you're actually collaborating with the candidate are typically the most high signal ones.
That makes sense. After you've been at this for a couple of years, like, are there any things that you've learned just kind of overall about building products, building companies, working at a startup, that kind of stuff? Any hot takes?
Any hot takes? I'm not good at hot takes. It's hard.
Yeah.
I think that's like, I would say that the kind of fun thing about starting a company is that, especially kind of in the Bay Area, San Francisco, is, it's very common in the Bay Area to start a company, but actually starting your own company is like very intense experience. And I think that is something that is, like maybe less spoken about. Like it's actually really, really hard to start a company. And maybe it's one of those things that you can't quite understand until you do it yourself. But I think it's funny because it's very normalized in the Bay Area, but it's still like quite an intense and hard thing to do. Outside of that, I would say that team building is really fun. I think like actually getting to build both the product and team that you would like is like a really cool and unique experience that I'm grateful for.
That's awesome. Well, thanks, Devin, for your time. If people want to learn more on Dosu, where should they go?
You can check us out, dosu.dev. You can create an account, play around with the product, or follow us on Twitter. I think it's @Dosu or LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, Devin.
Thanks, Alma.